C.S. Lewis was my 2024 Male Author of the Year, and I could not have had a better reading year because of him. And this is all of the C.S. Lewis books I read in 2024. Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Haley, and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, out to redeem my very own literary education. And in order to do so, each year I pick a male and a female author of the year. And in 2024, my male author of the year was C.S. Lewis, and I read 11 books written by C.S. Lewis, 1 book written about C.S. Lewis, and then 1 book where C.S. Lewis was actually a character in a fictional story himself. So it was a phenomenal reading year, and I'm going to share with you all of the books I read by him. So you can't read C.S. Lewis without reading the Chronicles of Narnia, and this is actually where I started with C.S. Lewis. In 2023, at the very end of the year, I read the first 2 books in the Chronicles of Narnia in publication order. So that would be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then Prince Caspian. So in 2024, I wanted to finish the Chronicles of Narnia. This was my very first time reading them as an adult, or just honestly ever. This was my first time reading them, and I had so much fun with them. I made a whole video talking about reading the Chronicles of Narnia for the first time as an adult, and it was so much fun. I think my favorites of the year were definitely The Magician's Nephew. There is a chapter in here called The Wood Between the Worlds, and I could live in that chapter. That is probably one of my favorite fictional chapters written of all time. I was literally disoriented after reading it. I was just there, and that is some powerful magical writing. So anytime I think I want to start writing some fiction, I'm going to revisit that chapter, because C.S. Lewis just has a way of soaking you into an atmosphere, and it was just enchanting. I felt transported. So The Magician's Nephew was one of my favorites. I also loved The Silver Chair. It has one of my favorite Narnians, which is Puddleglum in there, who is this very pessimistic marshwiggle. That's the name of the creature. But he's so pessimistic that it's really funny. However, he has an unwavering faith in Aslan despite his pessimism, and I just loved it. And then The Last Battle, which is kind of like the revelation story of Narnia. And just seeing Narnia wrapped up in this way makes me really yearn for the second coming of Jesus. And it makes me want to look up and can't wait to be in heaven with him. So I really loved that. The Chronicles of Narnia made me closer to Jesus. And for fictional, enchanting, magical books to be able to do that is really incredible. And these were children's stories. So that's something that I loved about C.S. Lewis, and that's why I was glad I chose him as a male author of the year, because his writing is so prolific and there's just such a wide range of what he wrote. So that was his children's fiction that I read, but I also read some of his nonfiction and I guess what you would say adult fiction. And the first one I read of his nonfiction was Mere Christianity. I actually started the year off with this one, and this is C.S. Lewis's just basic take of Christianity, what the main tenets of the faith are, and I thought he did such a great job of breaking down what Christianity is and what we all collectively believe. I really enjoyed that he wasn't coming from a specific denomination's point of view, just kind of the generality of what all Christians believe. And I felt that he voiced some Christian ideas like how God is outside of time and the Trinity. I thought he versed them so well that it will help me explain that to someone else. So I thought this was great if you're looking for a book on Christian apologetics. Even if you are a Christian, I feel like this is a great read because it can help you articulate your faith to other people. And then the next C.S. Lewis book I read is another one of his most popular books, and that is the Screwtape Letters. I really felt like the Screwtape Letters shows off the genius of C.S. Lewis because the storyline is such a brilliant idea. In the Screwtape Letters, Screwtape is sort of a lead devil who is writing letters to his nephew, who is also a devil, who is trying to tempt a Christian. In real life, I guess all Christians are assigned a devil to follow them and tempt them in this various ways to keep them from Christ. And it was hilarious, but also I thought he did such a great job of pointing out sins that can really sneak up on you, and so sins you don't necessarily think of. And the first thing I can think at the top of my head is a way that he described gluttony. Gluttony is not only just eating copious amounts of food, but can also be you being very, very particular about your food and the way that you want it and want it served to you. So think of someone that you go eat with at a restaurant and nothing ever satisfies them, and so they're incredibly unloving to the waiter or the chef or what have you. And that was just one example of many, but I found it really hilarious, but also insightful about how sin can really sneak up on you in these hidden ways. But I really loved the way this book ended with the patient, and I won't tell you why, you'll just have to read it. But this is definitely one of C.S. Lewis's works that I would start with. But after that, I read C.S. Lewis's An Experiment in Criticism. And this is one of my favorites. This is one of those books that I am going to reread and reread because it made me a better reader. In An Experiment in Criticism, C.S. Lewis looks at what is a good book? What is good literature? What is a good reader? What habits do they have? What does that look like? What does being a good reader mean? And I just really enjoyed it. I think in his time, there were a lot of critics who loved to criticize books, but they didn't love books. And this was kind of him combating that. And it did. It made me a better reader. It made me want to reread loved books more. It made me want to take my time with them. And I read this one along with the Literary Life podcast, and I just love that podcast because they always give me more insights into books like this and just encourage me in my reading. So that made it more fun. But this is one of my very favorite top C.S. Lewis books that I read last year, and I think I want to reread it again this year. So there's that. And then the next C.S. Lewis book that I read was The Abolition of Man. Now, I also followed along with the Literary Life podcast for this book, and I am so glad that I did. Because although it is one of C.S. Lewis's shortest works, it's really, really dense in its ideas and philosophies, and I had to take this one very slowly, but I'm glad that I did because this is C.S. Lewis's take on what does it mean to have an education. And as a homeschool mom, I really loved that. And education kind of can make us these analytic people that have no heart, no soul. And what education should really do is teach us the right virtues and morals and ways to live. Yes, of course, there's all the other things that we learn in education, but what's the point? What is the kind of people that we want to produce? And it takes a look at a modern textbook that was sent to him that was sort of subtly indoctrinating kids into not really having an imagination. It was very profound, and as a homeschool mom, this made me really think about the types of books that I read to my children. Now, I teach my kids in a Charlotte Mason way, so good literature is incredibly important, but this one really just backed that up, and I loved it for that. And again, I read this one along with the Literary Life podcast, and it definitely helped because this one was a little heavy, but so worth the read. And then one of the last books I read of his at the end of the year was The Great Divorce, and this is C.S. Lewis's own version of Dante's Divine Comedy, in which C.S. Lewis himself is Dante. So essentially, C.S. Lewis finds himself in hell and takes a bus up to heaven. And in Dante's The Divine Comedy, Dante has a guide, which is Virgil, who is the author of the Aeneid. And C.S. Lewis's guide was George MacDonald, who was one of his favorite authors, who wrote The Princess and the Goblin, At the Back of the North Wind, Phantastes, and many others. But this one, just like the Screwtape Letters, made me really think about what things we want to cling on to in this world that we can't take to heaven with us, and also talked a lot about subtle sins that can really grab hold of you so much that it can block you from heaven. There were some points made in here, like there are some people, whether it be writers or poets or the like, who are so obsessed with talking about Christianity that they never really get to know Christ. And I thought that was really profound. And there is also it was either a mother or a wife in this book who was so obsessed with controlling every part of the son's life that she felt that he was owed to her, and she just wanted to control everything about him. And there were so many other things like that in this book. It's kind of a fairy tale, and in the beginning, C.S. Lewis is pretty clear that this is not a theologically accurate portrayal of what he really thinks hell and heaven are. It's a story meant to teach you the things that could keep you out of heaven, just the sins that eat at us in small ways. And I love this. I think C.S. Lewis does almost a better job of getting his points across in story form than in his nonfiction form. So I loved it. And then the very last book that I read by C.S. Lewis, I actually listened to on audiobook, and that was A Preface to Paradise Lost. And I read this one because I also tackled Paradise Lost by John Milton, and I knew I was going to be intimidated by it because it's an epic poem. And so I wanted an introduction to it to really know what I was getting into. And in A Preface to Paradise Lost, C.S. Lewis talks about the form of epic poetry and what it is and why it has value. And he also talks about all of the different things that Milton addresses in Paradise Lost, and it felt kind of like a defense of Paradise Lost and what Milton was trying to do, what he wasn't trying to do, and sort of a defense at all of the critics of Paradise Lost. But he also tackled some of the ideas in Paradise Lost. So the character of Satan, and then the characters of Adam and Eve and angels. And I absolutely loved it because C.S. Lewis introduced me to Paradise Lost, and I understood it so much more because I read A Preface to Paradise Lost, and I highly recommend it if you ever want to tackle that great epic poem written by John Milton. And so the book that I read about C.S. Lewis was The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis, written by Dr. Jason Baxter. The Literary Life podcast has an episode with him discussing this book if you want to listen to that first to kind of get a good intro of what it is. But C.S. Lewis was a professor of medieval literature, and that was something that he was really passionate about, and it influenced so much of his writing and his thinking. And Dr. Baxter kind of goes through all of the different medieval books and voices that influenced him, and then where you can find that in the C.S. Lewis books. And that was so fun because I was reading all of C.S. Lewis's books as he was going through them, and he was also bringing up books that I was reading, like Dante's Inferno. That's one that this book helped me pick up because of him talking about its influence on Lewis, but just a lot of other things. And so it gave me a really good insight into what C.S. Lewis thought about the world and what his thoughts were on literature and how it influenced his writing, particularly the fiction writing. But I loved that one and highly recommend it. And the last book I listened to in December, and it was the perfect December read, and C.S. Lewis was actually a character in this book, and it's called Once Upon a Wardrobe. And it is about a brother and sister pair who could kind of not be more opposite. So George, the younger brother, has an illness that he's dying from. And his sister Meg currently attends Oxford, where C.S. Lewis is teaching, and she is very analytical and mathematical and has not much of an imagination. But George is using the Chronicles of Narnia to just really get through his illness. They are making him have such an imagination. You know, she finds her brother hiding in the wardrobe reading the books. And one of his last dying wishes is for his sister to find out, was any of this real? What was this influenced by? Is Aslan real? Who is he? What is he? And so Meg takes on a quest to find C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis starts sharing with her his life. He doesn't just point blank tell her what the Chronicles of Narnia is based off of or anything. He just starts telling her his life through a series of meetings. And so it felt a little bit biographical as well, because you are getting a good biographical picture of C.S. Lewis's life in this book, but it was told in this way through story that just made it so fun. And Meg has a story of her own, of kind of coming to imagination and literature and poetry. There's a love story that kind of comes in on the side with it that I just thought was so charming, but it didn't overpower the main ideas of the story. I listened to this in December, and it was perfect. It was a great way to end the year. It was a very fun way to end the year, so I highly recommend that one. I think the author, Patti Callahan, also wrote a book called Becoming Mrs. Lewis about the love story of C.S. Lewis and his wife, Joy. And I would really like to read this one next, but I had such a great time with C.S. Lewis last year. I still have a couple of his books that I haven't read yet that I still want to read. That is Till We Have Faces, The Four Loves, Surprised by Joy, and then the first book in his space trilogy called Out of the Silent Planet. These were ones I didn't get to, but I do plan on reading. But yeah, I had so much fun with C.S. Lewis, and if I had to tell you what are the books you should read, I would honestly start with this list, because these are some of his most popular works, so they're the most widely read, specifically Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, and the Chronicles of Narnia. If you want to start anywhere with C.S. Lewis, I would start at those three places. But if you're a reader and you love to read, I highly recommend an experiment in criticism, because it's just that good, and it's going to make your reading life so much richer. And so I had a great year with C.S. Lewis, and in 2025, my male author of the year is one of his very best friends, and that is J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote, obviously, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I've also never read. And now I'm going to. It just makes sense that after spending a year with C.S. Lewis, also known as Jack, that I now spend time with one of his very best friends. And that's it. That is all the C.S. Lewis books I read in 2024. That was so much fun. Please tell me what some of your favorite books in the Chronicles of Narnia are, what some of your favorite C.S. Lewis books are, or if you have read any C.S. Lewis books that I didn't mention in this video, because he's definitely an author that I just want to read everything he's ever written. So that's all for today. Thank you so much, friends, for being here. I will see you next time. Happy reading!